You can see me now. Shah might be a little bit taller than me, so he doesn't need the boost, but I hopefully haven't ruined anything.
Are you sharing the screen on Zoom?
You've been avoiding me by going to the library.
Thank you for reminding me.
Yeah, okay.
I didn't even know you were
This is it.
alive.
I mean, honestly,
Thank you.
Awesome.
Hello,
everyone.
Your development seminar.
It's like the first person I see. Like James is the first person I see every
Most
day.
days.
He wakes me
I'm
up.
like, I want to take this video. Bye, Shah.
Bye-bye.
Controlling the chaos.
I know, I went for a little theme this time, which is
Ellen
chaos.
cannot control the chaos. She adds to the chaos.
I tried this morning. It did not work.
Well, I think that's why it's themed like this, because you do need to control the chaos a bit.
Neither of us realized there was any.
All right, everyone online. I'm
This is
trying to
true.
just angle the
Like,
camera.
Not realizing it was an active debate.
Okay,
We
so
won anyway, but
most of the seminars I do are slightly interactive in the sense that just ask questions. If you have motions that you want to go through, arguments you want to go through that fit this the mold I'm going to talk about, feel free to discuss them. I always try and think of motions and examples of arguments, but I just never can find a good one because I'm trying to respond to it. So I'm like, oh no, that's dumb. But if you have one, let me know. All right, so this is going to be about speaking second at offices, and it's going to be about controlling chaos. And I have some chaos themed quotes that go along with it. Here's one of them, and you'll be getting more of them as you go along. The reason this is going to be about chaos a bit is that at second, especially offices, everything is chaotic, right? You have a chaotic 5-minute prep, or a little bit more than that. Then a chaotic first speech, and then you at second need to kind of merge together two chaotic cases and then find the fine line to cut through the noise, right? And so what I'm going to do, a little disclaimer before this, is that this is going to be about particular things that you can do at second. And so this is to augment everything you already know about responding, about your structure, about speaking second and responsive in general. So don't only do the things we're talking about, but this is just giving you extra tools, maybe explaining why there are certain things that are more, I guess, like just more efficient in how you do responses, right? So we're going to go through a little bit of prep strategy, but I think Liam covered most of this: prioritization, weighing, then flipping, connecting that to thinking a little bit deeper in prep. And then finally, you can ask questions, and I have some general tips that I thought up. All right, so firstly, in terms of prep, I think Liam explained a lot of what you do in prep. And I think a lot of the stuff he says is really useful, and especially from Liam from the perspective of first speaker, I think you should all default to that as second speaker, because it's hard to know the stress of speaking first at offices. I've never spoken first at offices for good reason, because I would be really bad at it. So watch Liam's prep seminar if you haven't already watched. And I think the biggest takeaway from that I found was about how you should support your first speaker in creating that case. And thinking one step ahead, so that while they're writing down the mechanisms, you are thinking and jotting down the impact, so you're able to add that to the speech immediately. Just a couple of things about the case is you should try within the first minute to come up with your plan, right? Your path to victory. And usually officers' motions are simple enough that it should be very obvious what the clash is going to be, or at least very obvious what you can prove in that debate. So then everything after that can be about prepping those mechanisms, that impact, explaining why it's really important. What you should do during this time, obviously, it depends on how you and your partner prep. If you tend to try and create really big, robust cases, that's also really good. But ideally, you want to think about the other case a bit, because you eventually need to put those two cases together. You'll need to weigh up between two different outcomes, those kinds of things. And it helps you be preemptive even in your first speech. So ideally, and this is like old institutional knowledge that I was told when I started speaking at offices, you kind of want very simple stuff in your first speech. I think the meta of debating has moved on a little bit from that, but I think it's broadly the same. You want context, set up what the world looks like, then you want a point that provides an outcome that is important. So you do the mechanism, you do the outcome, you explain what it looks like, and you explain why that's important. And then the final thing you might want to do in your first speech is already start being a little preemptive of the other side's case, right? And that just gives you a leg up in the sense that you will be able to then deal with that case better at second. But even if you don't put that into your first speech, it's good to think about that. So then you already have some pre-prepared responses, pre-prepared weighing by the time your second speech comes around. Then the last thing here is that it's important to be charitable of the other side, even in prep. It doesn't matter what team you're going against. Officers' debates are usually so simple that it's very accessible to come up with some good material on either side. So you want to skip to the even if. So even if the other side gets to claim all their benefits, why do we still win? And that is weighing, we'll discuss in a little bit. Cool, any questions on that? Now, it's very quick. I don't want to spend too much time on prep. Secondly, about prioritization, right? So you don't have that much time in your speech. You don't have much time to prepare your speech. So what you always need to be thinking about is what is the quickest way for you to win. And after you do that, and only after you do that, can you waste time by responding to the details as much. And then there are a couple of reasons for that we'll discuss. Come in. Don't worry, we haven't done much. What we've gone through is prep, which is basically the same as Liam's seminar, just emphasizing a couple of points on that. All right, so in terms of prioritization, here's a quote for you. And the reason this is important is because you don't want to be swept away by the debate, right? You don't want to necessarily follow the path that your first speaker or their first speaker's done. You do want to impose a little bit of order onto what's happened in the debate so far. And that comes with a little bit of practice, right? And you need to be confident that what you're doing is the correct thing and is the smart thing, which might be hard to do at first. Just try it out. And then if you get it wrong, you can slowly get better at it. But you have to be confident to make that strategic decision and actually impose some conception and framework into the debate. All right, so in terms of prioritization, for responses, don't just respond to every single thing. Like even when I write down the other team's case during their speeches and I'm writing down their case, tracking it so that I can come up with responses, there are certain things that are so obvious that you're not going to waste time responding to, right? In a 3v3 debate, maybe you might want to challenge some of those things because then you can actually do you have time to go like, okay, because I marginally reduce this context. Here are reasons as to why then their outcomes are even more marginal, and then you can do some weighing. You don't really have that much time to do all of that stuff, and you don't have a third speaker to kind of wrap it up for you. So try and respond to the top level of their analysis as much as possible, because if you can take out the top level, everything else below should fall. And that's much better or much easier than dealing with all the branches of their argument. And I'll explain what that looks like later on. But you also need to be explicit, right? So every time you respond to a top level analysis, and I'll again characterize what that looks like, tell the judge, because I've responded to this key foundation of their case, none of their outcomes can actually happen to the way that they claim, and then explain that very clearly. In terms of substantive, you can always bring in substantive at any point, because I think the distinction between responses and substantive are very blurry or relatively blurry, and at officers even more so. So at second affirming, you can actually bring substantive material, and I'm going to explain how you can pivot and frame it as a flip and stuff like that, right? Second neg, usually a little bit more strict, but you do have some leeway. But ideally, you don't want to give the impression that you've changed things too much at second negative, right? Second affirming is a little bit more free form. All right, so top level responses. This is one of the motions at World Schools at our grounds. So this debate's about like giving children more autonomy versus not giving them autonomy. Let's just say that that's what the debate's about. And here's a claim that giving children more autonomy will improve the parental relationship. They explain that this looks like parent communicating risks and children finding it easy to talk because they're not going to be punished as much. And the outcomes are several, right? So they say you get better support structures in the long term because your relationship with the parents is now better and better foundation than the comparative, where the parents are like more, I guess, dictatorial over your life. And they maybe spend like a minute explaining all the different long-term impacts. And then in the short term, you could say it prevents harm from the children because you're more likely to talk about issues, you're more likely to come to parents for help, that kind of thing. Now, where would you respond to this? It's obviously interactive. Tell me where. Yeah.
In context, test what it looks like.
Yeah, yeah, very correct. Because like the important point here is that all of their benefits come from the idea of what it looks like when children and parents interact, right? And so if you attack them there, you can claim that a lot of their benefits don't actually follow through. In fact, if their metric of this debate is better parental relationships with their children, and that's how they want to win the debate, by attacking that point, not only do you take down some of their outcomes, like most of their outcomes, if they can't prove that they actually have better communication, but you can actually flip this and say, by their own metric, because they wanted to achieve better relationships, if we can prove to you that they have worse relationships because of that, you also win the debate. And you don't have to do that much weighing in that instance because they've done all the weighing, they've done all the impacting, and you claim all of those impacting, right? And that's just very quick, very easy. Once you've done that and established that as a path to victory, then you can move on to even ifs later on in your speech. But this should be always your first instinct, try and respond to the top level claim here. So stuff that, this is stuff that doesn't change on either world, right? Parents are time poor, they have certain biases, and so therefore the assertion from side affirming doesn't actually work. We've proven the opposite. So why do you want to do this? I've already explained that, you don't have to then respond to all the mixed sets and impacts later on, or you can respond to a couple of the main ones. But ideally, if you win that top level clash, you've already won that debate. So easy to do in 6 minutes in offices, and also easy to think about in prep and think about when you're responding and focus your time there. Now, obviously this comes with like a caveat. If you see that top level claim and you have no idea why it's wrong, or you have some idea, but you're not confident you're going to win at that point, then you can't do this, right? Then you should be like, okay, I can't do the flip. I can't do the top level response. Then you have to respond to everything as much as you can. But also, I think because prep is so short, a lot of people tend to assume that first bit of the argument, right? They assume that because the motion shows that you can now treat your children better, because that's the policies that parents will now give their children a little bit more responsibility, they assume that it'll be done well. So a lot of the first foundational assumptions are not going to be as well mechanized, as well characterized by the team that gets up to speak, just because there's not enough time. So this is two things, right? Firstly, this is a place where you should be able to attack, but also you should be aware that your own case might have these problems, right? And now this might not be obvious to you in prep because prep is so short, but when you're listening to your first speaker, you should also look out for those kinds of holes. Because again, that's where a good opposition would attack you on. But even if they don't attack you, remember, if you are second affirming, there's also a second neg who could also do that, right? Flips are very easy to do at second neg because you're not actually adding new substantive, you're co-opting affirming substantive. You're giving responses to the top level claim, and then you're claiming all the impacts that they made. So you're not adding substantive material. So even on second affirming, if you see that hole, try and fix it. And don't be very obvious that it's a problem. Be like, just to clarify this a little bit more, or characterize it a little bit more, or to enhance or augment the context that was provided to you at first. Here are reasons why parents will do this well. Something like that, right? Cool. Additional advice, be charitable, kind of along the same lines that I've already talked about in terms of having another speaker come up after you. But remember, reply speeches are actually very powerful in offices. They have lots more leeway because there's not much time to do the entire debate. So they can make responses. They can make actually pretty pivotal framing points that maybe change the entire perspective of the debate for the judge, but that can be done at reply. So you always want to be charitable when responding to the other side. Let's say they make a point not well, or they're missing a bunch of gaps. Don't just say, look, that's unmechanized. That's an assertion. Prove the opposite as much as you can, because that adds to the work that the other team has to do. They can't just come up and fix it and then claim all those benefits. They actually have to try and respond to the stuff you say. And again, if you're flipping this, that becomes a very critical clash for the entire debate, because you don't need to do, stress this again, if you flip their metric, then you don't need to necessarily do much weighing. You can claim that you won on the grounds that they wanted to set themselves. All right, and the last thing there is the reverse of this, be preemptive. Think about what they're going to do even before they do it. And that could be a useful role in prep. I think we've already discussed this as well. Cool, any questions on that? Again, this is to augment everything you already know about structure and everything you know about responses, and to make it a little bit more specific to the chaos that is inherent in offices, right? Cool. In terms of weighing, I love these quotes. Here is a print by Escher. And so the thing about officers is it is dangerous sometimes to claim a lot of outcomes because it's very hard to explain why the judge should care about one of them. And so disparate outcomes, disparate like metrics of this debate are usually really hard to kind of control that chaos and then win. But you could try and do that. Most often in officers debates, there are two very clear outcomes that teams are trying to achieve, and then you need to weigh between them. If that's the case, then you need to focus on that, and you need to react to what the other side's doing when you hear their case, right? If they have one point that they're running, respond to that, weigh against that. If there are multiple of them, just take some time to explain to the judge why each of those things they chose has a trade-off in the amount of impact they're able to prove or the mechanization, and they respond to where each of those points are the weakest. Now, obviously, this scales with your word efficiency and your ability to push out content, right? Like a really good first speaker and a really good team with lots of good ideas in prep could be able to do a lot of things and overwhelm you. But that's something that you need to respond in kind and be able to do a lot in your speech. But ideally, there should be one thing that you'll do. So there are two types of weighing that I'm going to discuss. Firstly is weighing on outcomes. So when either side has an outcome they want to achieve, it could be the same outcome, it could be different outcomes. In this instance, it's different outcomes, and you need to explain why the judge should care about your outcome, even if the other side achieves their outcome, right? What you do in responses usually never amounts to completely disproving a point from the other side, unless that point is irrelevant to the debate or just badly placed and not really comparative. Then you can destroy that point and just win, right? But often, and especially in simple officers debates, there will be a clear thing that the other side is likely to claim to some extent. So most of your responses, in the worst case, just mitigate that. So you need to be able to weigh up why your outcome, once impacted, is important. The other type of weighing, so this is what we call a destination debate, weighing between outcomes, where both sides have different destinations they want to get to. This point about weighing analysis are types of debates where it's about the journey to the same outcome. Both teams have the same group, basically, the same outcome for that group. It's about which policy can get there better, right? And in those instances, then it's very closely linked to flipping, because it's basically whoever wins that mechanistic clash of getting that outcome will then win the outcomes to that group. So before we get onto that, I'm just going to explain about weighing parts of the same outcome and tying this to different outcomes. So the first thing you should do is be skeptical about the claims by other sides as to whether the outcome is actually the same. So a good example of this is a debate about, let's say, minority representation in historical fiction. I think there was a debate like this at Joint. It's been around quite often these days because of Bridgerton, probably. So is that when the poor Sarah McKenzie? So the important thing here is that there could be like a false equivalence claim by teams, right? Because in debating, we tend to use words to represent those outcomes. And again, because it's really hard to get into the details of impacting, teams tend to, or in general, people tend to default to the word, right? We get benefits to the economy, wealth goes up, or in this case, representation. And you might decide then to debate on, who gets more representation? Like, which of these films are more easy to create? And that will be weighing on the scale of representation, or like the likelihood that you get more representation in a very general sense. So that's one way to do this clash, and that's more mechanistic, like which film is more likely to be made. Therefore, we get minority actors in films, therefore representation. But these representations might not be the same, right? Because you can have representation in the Bridgerton sense of a minority character playing a role that didn't happen historically, or you could have something like a story about the minority context. Now, both of these have minority characters in them, but the form of representation is different. So your first instinct should be, but is this the same outcome actually? If it's a different outcome, then you can break that symmetry, right? It doesn't matter if they get more films. Even if we get less films of a better, more meaningful representation, we can still win the debate. That should be your first instinct. Again, you don't have to do it, but it's an option that you have, and you can decide then before your second speech which way you want to go, which way is more strategic. And the way you if you can't break that symmetry and it's the same outcome, then you'll wait on things like the likelihood of success, the stuff I talked about, right? Which film is more likely to be made, those kinds of things. Or if there are harms to other people along the way, even if you get to the same outcome, that's the way of doing the even if weighing as well. I've put level of fiat in here just because it's sometimes something I use, that it's easier for us to do this than them to do it. But I would encourage you not to get into battles around how much fiat people have at offices, because it just makes a messy debate. Something to note as well, especially in a very tight fight for the break, which I think this officers will be pretty tight because there are quite a few good teams going up there. You also want speaks, right? Like that's how the fourth and third teams are usually decided, stuff like that. So, you know, and again, also for the fold, because we have pretty big officers, a lot of teams going, the brackets will be bigger as well. So having better speaks means that you're more likely to face easier teams, stuff like that. And you don't want the debate as a whole to be bad. You want, I think, to just hype up the debate, hype up your first speaker, and being charitable helps. So hyping up the other team as well. This team made a really good point. Unfortunately, it fails for these reasons, right? Then it psychologically tells the judge, oh, this is actually a pretty good debate. Something nice is happening, gives everyone higher speaks. You get higher speaks. Debating is just gaslighting the judge. That's essentially it, right? Okay, so when you have different outcomes, so that was the same outcome, how do we get to that outcome? Just journey debates. This is a destination debate. There are three major ones, major weighing of outcomes you could do. One is obviously scale, right? Be specific as possible to the number of people comparatively to the other side. The intensity, so how harmful each outcome is or how keenly felt that outcome is. And then finally, the likelihood, which is more mechanistic stuff. These are the three basic things that you should try and hit. You don't have to call them scale, intensity, likelihood, but these are just triggers for you to come up with some ideas of weighing. And remember, this is always the even if, and stressing this again, in 3v3 at second, you have more time to do mechanistic stuff because your third speaker will do the weighing. You don't have that time and you don't have that luxury. So do some mechanistic responses when you think it's ideal for you and if it significantly harms their case. But the best way to win is to weigh up against them. Even if they achieve their benefits, why do we still win? And that should always be in your speech in some place. Any questions on that? No? All right, let's talk about principle analysis very quickly. I just want to say that principles have an undeserved bad rep, right? Principles are just metrics that you're trying to tell the judge to judge the debate by, right? So non-contingent principles are just telling the judge, look, you shouldn't just default to utilitarianism, which is the default for many judges on the circuit, and you should think of other things. And that's what a non-contingent principle is. I'm not saying you should run non-contingent principles. Some debates you have to do that, right? So like that, like for example, last officers, there was a debate about New Zealand cutting trade ties with China, and we were F, right? And like there's so many harmful things that happen from cutting trade deals with trade ties with China for New Zealand, like so many jobs lost. All we had to do was mitigate that to a very great extent. So a lot of mechanistic work to mitigate those harms and to say maybe the benefits aren't that great, aren't that long-term, and then just run a very tight principle about, authoritarianism, blah, blah, blah. But sometimes you have to do that, but, it depends on your own relationship with principles. If you like principles, you can go for it. If you don't have to. But contingent principles are actually really important. And the important thing about making contingent principles is don't obviously claim that they're non-contingent, right? Because the other team can just be like, look, because of these reasons, this is contingent on them actually achieving outcomes. What non-contingent principles do is point out that utilitarianism is subjective. There isn't the best thing for everyone. And so therefore, there might be other concerns that elevate the importance of certain outcomes over others. So as an educational body, your duty might be to provide education to students. Another duty could be to prepare students for the future. And a lot of education debates, that's the clash, right? Should we do things that teach children maths because it'll be really useful for them in their world because of blah, blah, or should we do things that enhance social cohesion or something like that because that will prepare them for the real world or make them more rounded individuals? And all your points around what the purpose of education is just telling the judge to believe one of these points is more important than the other, even if both can happen in a trade-off in the debate. Some examples of this: choice and democracy stuff, which is just a choice principle. there is no inherent good life, therefore people should be able to choose. Saying utilitarianism doesn't have the answers to everything. Individuals have the answer to their own actions and their own preferences, therefore we should default to giving them more choice. Unique capacity is a good one, which is that if you are the only actor who's able to do something, or the actor that's able to achieve change to a certain group better than other people, or other actors, you should have a duty to do this, even if you have another way of benefiting a different group of people. Does that make sense? And this is like, this comes down in lots of debates where it's like, well, you can achieve that change, but we can achieve it slightly less, but through other alternatives, but we don't incur the same harm, right? And framing it principally gives the judge just an easy way of explaining that in the adjudication, an easy way of explaining that in their mind, and therefore more likely to walk down that path and give you the debate. And finally, just obligations, right? So maybe you have some moral obligation to a certain person, you assume the duty over them, or a debate about historical reparations. There is obviously an assumed duty and obligation to help a certain group of people. Now that is still contingent because there are multiple ways of helping different people, but framing what exactly that duty looks like might then elevate certain things over others. The example here is like giving land reparations back versus solving status quo inequality or something like that, right? Welfare versus land reparations. You can be like, well, actually on affirming, you can be like, well, land reparations is directly almost more equivalent to the harm that was caused before. Therefore, we have a duty to directly give reparations in that form, right? So even if both of these things are equal in their outcomes to those people, or even if doing welfare is probably more impactful and more like beneficial to that group, we still should do this more because of those principal reasons, right? Does that make sense? Yeah. So a lot of weighing, even the scale and likelihood and stuff we were talking about, intensity specifically as well, is making a principal claim, except you don't dress it up as a principle. So just more to break the dichotomy of things that are principles and aren't principles, is just metrics of how to win, how the judge should see the debate. If you think about it like that, it's much easier to come up with those weighing points. Does that make sense? Cool. Any questions on weighing? Any examples you want to go through? Nothing that pressing? No? Okay, cool. This is I think the most important one, because I really like flipping arguments, and I think it's underdone in debating. And I think it's just, I would say the thing I used the most last year to win debates at offices. Because again, the couple of things is that the other side is also going to be chaotic. You're going to be chaotic, and there'll be a lot of things missed from both sides. And controlling that and their chaos means that you're more likely to be able to win the debate in general. This is another print by Escher, hands drawing itself. Anyway, so flipping, there are a couple of ways you can flip. You can flip mechanisms. You can flip the comparative that the other side sets up and the debates happening on. And flipping mechanisms is part of what we discussed in terms of weighing between mechanisms, except here is where there is a certain point where the action taken can branch off into two different things. So this is a debate that's happened before. I think it was also at schools Nats, which was Rumspringa is an Amish tradition where 18-year-olds are sent off into the real world out of their isolated communities for a year, and then they can choose to come back or not. Most of them choose to do so. And that for the Amish people is part of their religion and stuff like that. The debate is framed as you would make all isolated religious communities have a Rumspringa, basically. A year off when you turn 18, go off into the world, come back if you choose so. So what changes is very obvious. So 18-year-olds are exposed to the outside world. That happens on side affirming, but also the elders and parents of that community know that this is going to happen. So these reactions will actually determine the outcome that people want to get. So one outcome that side affirming could claim is because they're exposed to the outside world and progressive world, those individuals are less radical, but also because, and I'm adding to the slide here, because the parents and elders know that these people are going to go into the real world, they can't lie about the real world as much, right? So they have to tone down their messaging as well. But also, when people go out and interact and come back in, maybe there's a cycle of becoming less radical. The negative side probably wants to flip this claim and say no, because you're forcing them out into an uncomfortable environment. They're more radicalized. So it all turns on that top level clash again about how people react to the existence of this policy, right? So, no, that's not it. Just to go into this further, then, because I don't have another slide on this. So the clash comes down to those kinds of reactions. So on negative, you can say, firstly, this is an uncomfortable environment. They are unlikely to make friends for these reasons, those kinds of things. And secondly, you can say that elders aren't actually going to stop lying about the outside world, but they'd actually double down and say, you shouldn't trust anything that happens in the outside world. Maybe make it really, really like paint up these people to be devils, so you shouldn't believe them. They're here to test your faith, those kinds of things. And obviously the assumed outcome from side affirming that they might not mechanize as much and might spend way more time on those impacts can be flipped really easily if you are more on point in prep and more on point in the debate to react to that. The other way of flipping is to use the comparative, right? And this I think is slightly more big brained and therefore requires a little bit more explanation, but I think can be really powerful. And the comparative is something that people don't think of as much as they should in prep, and something that's really hard to think of in the 5 minutes prep. So take from this as well some tips for prep that you should be thinking about these things and making sure that the outcome that you claim is comparative and unique to your side. An example here is this house opposes the rise of cryptocurrencies. The argument that side affirming makes is a lot of vulnerable people are now more likely, since you've kind of normalized cryptocurrencies as it rises and financial institutions buy in, they buy into crypto more. Crypto is highly volatile, therefore these people lose lots of money. So the parts of their argument are people buy in, crypto is volatile, they lose money. The responses can be that the comparative isn't changing that much. So in the status quo, so they want to say that more people buy in, vulnerable people buy in because there's more hype. Hype exists right now, right? But hype exists for the wrong reasons. The hype exists, and you have to mechanize, obviously, because of speculation, because there's an allure of quick buck, advertising, marketing, that kind of thing, which means that the most vulnerable people who are losing money currently buying in the status quo. That's not something that side affirming can actually prevent. Secondly, sure, maybe more people buy into cryptocurrency in our world, but that's actually good. If more financial institutions and people buy in, crypto becomes less volatile, which means overall, those people lose less money because now it's more stable. Whereas in their world, on the comparative, people still buy in, it's volatile. They're the ones that actually cause more people to lose money. So you're flipping it by claiming that no, the exact problem that they are trying to solve exists in their world. And the rise of cryptocurrencies actually solves that problem. Does that make sense? And what I want you to get from this is the pattern, right? That they claim that something is better on their side, but doesn't actually understand why it might get worse in the status quo and why you prevent it, right? And that pattern repeats itself a lot, depending on how they make their argument. Another example of this is this opposes nationalism. The argument from side affirming is that nationalism creates an us versus them divide that creates tensions and the potential for violence, like Hindu nationalism in India, Buddhist nationalism in Sri Lanka, that kind of thing. So they say divide happens. On the comparative, it's better because that divide doesn't happen, therefore we win. The response here, or the flip using the comparative, is hitting again the top level analysis that they might just assert, right? Because people think nationalism, they're like, oh, ethnic nationalism bad, therefore we should oppose it. But the assumption there is that nationalism creates those divides. So if you break that assumption and go one level above and say, look, the divide that humans create amongst each other is a little bit more deeper and more human, right? It's like a bit of tribal instinct that exists regardless of a nation state. So in the absence of nationalism, that divide will still form, obviously to mechanize this a little bit, but it'll form on other lines. Instead of being in a nation, it forms on ethnic and religious lines, right? Now, obviously, you still need to break that deadlock because all you've done at that point of the debate is not a flip, it's just mitigation. It's saying that it would happen anyway on their side. So it's not a unique benefit without nationalism that they avoid those kinds of divides. The way you flip it is by thinking about why does nationalism make that better? And so you need to mechanize that as well, which is in this case that nationalism is easier to buy into. Right? It's easier to buy into, I guess, like cricket in Sri Lanka and India. And if nationalism can also form around those grounds, than it is to change your ethnicity or to choose to leave your God and join another one just so you can fit in. So you can say that nationalism creates another layer of buy-in that doesn't exist on the rest of the house. And therefore, divides and ethnic conflicts are worse on their side. Does that make sense? Any questions about this? No? It's a similar pattern, right? They try and claim a false equivalence that nationalism creates something. And you're like, no, hold on. There might be a deeper reason that isn't solved by this motion. Therefore, that doesn't change. And then you can try and do the flip. But even that first bit is good enough for mitigation. And you can obviously have other benefits that stand alone. Cool. And the last thing to discuss here is thinking deeper. And all I mean by this is just, this is a culmination of all the points I've brought to you. And I think the theme of this is that top level analysis, the unsaid assumptions at the start of every argument. And in officers, it's emphasized way more, right? Because you don't have much time to think. Therefore, you are less likely to worry about those unsaid assumptions and just make that argument. So that's A, something to watch out for when you prep, but B, something that is more likely to give you an opportunity to flip and do the kinds of top level analysis thinking. So for the example of flipping how parents react and stuff like that, you can explain again, the things that don't change are parents' incentives. This is about Rumspringer, by the way, to make the children come back. 18-year-olds being unprepared, or there's an incentive to not prepare them because they want those children to have a bad time outside. Because again, you do some parental analysis here, parents do care about their children and want them to be safe, but you're making the argument that they care more about the child's spiritual life. And therefore, what is most important for these parents is for that child not to get corrupted by the liberal progressive world outside there, but for them to come back. So even if that means sacrificing their child's short-term experience and happiness when they go out there and make them have a shit time, they are more likely to not prepare them or prepare them badly so that they're likely to come back. So it's incentive analysis. But that is hard to think of on the spot sometimes when you're like, oh, I can flip this. I need to think why parents are likely to do that. So what you want to do in prep as well is just think deeply about, okay, this is a journey debate and the branch is about how people react to this. If they can prove that people react well, they get all their benefits of more choice and more progressiveness and less radicalism. But if you can flip that the other way, then we almost automatically win because you get more radicalism and you win on the metrics that we think is likely they're going to run. Obviously, there may be other points spattered across and you have to deal with them as well, but this could be a main clash. So this is something you could do in prep. This is something you could do during your first speaker's speech, is thinking about this deeper point. And so an example here is this debate. First F comes up and makes it all about reducing radicalism. Your first speaker has arguments around choice or something like that, but also something along this line, and that clash then forms. What you should do then as second negative speaker waiting for your speech is think, what is the key clash now? Because the clash has changed. The clash is now not about the way up between those things or about the mechanisms of how those impacts form. It's about what this reaction looks like. So then you should spend most of your time thinking about this, thinking deeper on that particular point. So one is identifying what the clash is becoming and then obviously mechanizing it. That's again up to your own ability and knowledge, but that's the structure is there for you to be actually use it. Hopefully that this conveys that to you. Similarly here, what's the pivotal claim? Here's an interactive part. This is the flip on cryptocurrencies. James looks like he has an answer.
I don't want to be wrong.
It's fine to be wrong.
This isn't a real class, right?
That's like, I don't know, more people will buy in.
Oh, and there's one more.
Hype exists.
Yeah, that's part of it, but like that is not. I mean, you can prove that hype exists because it kind of runs the same lines that they're running. So like, okay, it's not. You don't have to mechanize it as much. You just have to point out that the opposing the rise doesn't solve the hype that currently exists. But the other point is true that it's that more people buying in reduces volatility, right? And so immediately when you've decided to run this line on neg, right, or you hear them on F making this point about volatility, maybe you thought, oh, that's a really dumb point for them to run because I have all the responses for it, but they run it anyway. Then okay, now we can flip this and we can win on their own metric. And while your first negative speaker says, actually, the rise of cryptocurrency is good because it helps people who can't access financial services, some unique, that's a different outcome, right? That you are going to try and whip and weigh up against their outcome. You can be thinking, okay, we have that outcome. They have this outcome about people losing money. How do we flip that point? And then if you walk through the steps we already did, you'll come to this conclusion. We need to prove these two things. And then you come up with these points, ideally, right? So more people having crypto means that it's more stable because more people own it, right? So it's less swings when like Elon Musk gets high and says something on Twitter, stuff like that. Or when financial institutions buy into it, now you, instead of having crypto that can't easily be transferred into dollars or into goods, now you can actually use that crypto. So when you have more trades happening, crypto becomes stable, or governments are more likely to regulate it, or just have more information because it's now a bigger topic and more people and more real world people actually use it. So you get education about it, something like that. The last thing to note here is that it's important to explain this explicitly again. Because the debate is so chaotic, when you're making these kinds of top level claims, you shouldn't always trust the judge to put 2 and 2 together and join those dots for you. So you should be very explicit about what this response actually does in the debate. So this adjudicator flips their claim. They don't achieve their benefits of stopping people lose money. In fact, they ensure it happens. It's only on our side that we stop people from losing money. So 2 things. We've proven that they harm these people way more, and we've proven that we benefit them, and by their own metric, we win this debate. Yeah, and you can do that much faster and more efficiently than I just did. Cool. And that also means that everything after that doesn't matter anymore, right? Like who cares why losing money is bad? All the impacting that first F did to show why it's so harmful, that even if you have extra access to financial institutions and they're trying to weigh up against you, right? They'll be spending time impacting why it's so harmful for people to lose money. Now you've claimed all that. So the two minutes of their speech, you've claimed it without even having to do those 2 minutes. And that's why this is an OP strategy, in my opinion. And wherever you can flip, you should flip. Cool. General tips. Don't worry if you can't control the chaos. The chaos will control you. So just some general tips about the tournament, just the daily experience of a tournament. Officers has much less downtime. It's like in a debate, prep, give your speeches, then there's like maybe 15 minutes of judges deliberating, then you get the decision, then you come back out, you have a little bit of time, then you go back into another debate. There are 4 debates per day, so it's very fast paced. Don't get bogged down too much on the debate that just happened, especially the feedback that you get as well. Some feedback will be useful and can be easily applicable, or it could be something really bad that you did or really dumb that you did that the judge points out, okay, I need to fix that. But don't get too fixated on this feedback you got for the previous speech. You'll be doing a lot of practice. You're all here getting wisdom and knowledge from us, but also just feedback that you get that is more practicable in your run up to the tournament should be what you should focus on right now. And then at the tournament, try and win the next debate and not the last one. Also, I think it's important to de-stress. Like, you don't have to be with the squad all the time. You can always go and do your own thing. I like walking outside after debates, in between the debate and the adjudication, listening to some music, chatting to some people, that kind of thing. Yeah. But like, do your own thing. Don't feel pressured to hold up the entire squad. Have fun, blah, 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 and talk to us. We're all going to be there, and you have a lot of judges and mentors to talk to. So if you have any concerns or stress, you can talk to the equity officer of this tournament, which is me, by the way. Cool. All right, any questions? This could be anything, like just in general, when you came to this seminar and you didn't expect it to be all about chaos, what did you want to hear? What did you want to know, and how can I help?
What happens if you, like, as a second speaker, try to like preemptively falsify your main like pivotal claim, but then it doesn't get raised by the previous like say first name or something.
So you are
let's say your second half.
Your second
and you
half.
have to like falsify your like pivotal claim, so that second name doesn't then like destroy it. But first name hasn't then like responded to that claim or like challenged it yet.
So you first half makes a good point.
Yeah.
First neck doesn't handle it at all, and you're wondering what to do because you're worried about second neck coming up.
Yes.
Okay. So it's hard, but it's kind of what you have to do in 3v3 when you're F as well, because there they have a neg block, right, which is like 12 minutes of uninterrupted speeches, and they still have a neg block in officers, 9 minutes this time, right? The weighing stuff helps a lot, because what weighing does is like, even if they try and mitigate your impacts, so even if they try and prove their impacts to the fullest extent, we still win because you should care about our outcomes more than theirs. And so what I would encourage you to do at second affirming is, if they haven't responded to your stuff, you don't need to rebuild that like that much. But then what you should do is try and flip their stuff, respond to their stuff. And then if you feel like your stuff needs to be impacted a little bit more, impact that and weigh it out. And what that does is pile on a lot of work for second neg to do. And the more stuff that they have to do, the more likely they're going to miss certain things. And then your F reply can be way more than the normal reply that you're used to at 3v3. It can do a lot more. So you can point out those kinds of, I guess, misprioritizations by the other side. Why not responding to this particular point wins? Because Ellen at second F has already brought to you these weighing metrics, right? If you apply those metrics to this debate, you should be convinced that we win. So you do get the last say, and it does require a little bit of collaboration between the F reply and the second F, but you're on the same team, you've practiced this before, you should try and do some Fs, obviously. Don't try and always pick neg when you win, or hopefully you lose the coin cost and someone else will pick neg, so you will be doing some Fs in practice. And then try out what works for you. The best feedback I'll give here is that you should ask your judge for their thoughts. So be like, if you lose, be like, okay, what could I have done at second affirming to convince you that we would win throughout? And similarly, in F reply, what could we have done? And sometimes the judge will be like, okay, I would have liked to hear more of this point. And then you kind of get a little bit more of a strategic sense of where to focus on. Again, don't take it too much to heart, because judges are different from each other. But if you do that enough, you should have a pattern of, oh, okay, so this is where the strategic response should be. And you're more likely to do that the next time. I guess the other stuff is just work on your word economy, work on your structure, in the sense that you want to be slow and control the chaos a little bit more, because you actually get more done in your speech then. The more you can get done in your speech, the more parts you open up for your F reply to whip. And the less able is second neg is to respond to everything. Maybe there is some worth to point out the lack of response from first negative. Be like, look, first negative doesn't respond to any of this. That means all of this stands, any response from second neg is way too late for us to respond to. Which means then, is you set up in the judge's mind, like, okay, we didn't have a chance to do that. And that means your F reply has more leeway to be like, okay, look, all these responses just came out in second neg. I'm going to respond to those responses now. And maybe there's a way there to push a little bit more at reply. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But yeah, there's no easy answer to this. Being F, this is why I think Melissa said in her presentation, you should pick neg most of the time and try and win sides, because F is hard. Not that it's impossible to win on F, but it's hard. Yeah.
How much can you actually add on second neg? Like, what's the limit?
It's one of those questions, the theoreticians have been asking for a long time. So so think of second neg maybe more as like a third F, right? Like you have a similar kind of power as third F to shape the debate a little bit more, add a couple of things. But I would always encourage you, just because again, you can't rely on judges being, I guess, uniform in their thoughts about second neg, to use the language that we've been talking about. So instead of saying, I'm going to add a substantive here, be like, okay, I'm going to flip their substantive, and that gives us this benefit. Or you can be like, they claim they will get X benefit. I'm going to respond to that by showing how we actually get that benefit. So you're making substantive in the sense that it's positive building up of a world, as opposed to breaking down a world, but you're framing it as mitigating their outcomes, right? So let's say a debate about cryptocurrency, they're like, this gives people locked out of traditional systems the ability to access capital and loans through cryptocurrency. Your response doesn't have to just respond to those mechanisms. You can be like, look, their benefit they claim is unlocking capital for all these people. I'm going to respond to this and mitigate it by showing you how in the status quo, there's a trend towards accessing capital. Here are incentives for governments to try and make use of unlocked capital, because these people don't pay taxes, right? In the status quo, the shadow economies of many countries. And so there is current incentives for banks to set up. Banks aren't monopolistic. You can make some arguments there. Therefore, competition means they want to reach out to a wider audience. So you're making substantive claims, and you're building up a world of the status quo. But if you frame it as responses, judges are more likely to credit it. And I think usually will credit it. Yeah, does that make sense? This is all about framing. A lot of debating is about framing. Yeah, any other questions? Yeah.
Would you recommend, like, as first neg,
Yeah.
trying to flip points at first neg or respond to the top claim? Like, which one do you think is more strategic?
So, sorry, yeah, this is the disclaimer again, isn't that you should always try and default to these things. These are just the tools that you will learn yourself when to use them or not. So the answer to your question is that it depends, right? Like if you see an easy flip, or if you pre-prepared this flip because you're like, oh, it's obviously going to run this, let's try flip it, then just make that flip at the top there. And some of these things are, I guess, mutually exclusive sometimes, right? Like either you can respond to the claim or you can flip it. An example again is like one of the outrun motions in at World Schools was overemphasizing minorities' roles in war. So like women during World War II, there was a certain example of a Japanese crew during World War II as well, fighting for the US. So the argument there is you overemphasize that, and that might be lying kind of, you're kind of stretching the truth a little bit. So there was a discussion in the debate about whether people would react badly to it. Whether people like, hey, that's not true, my dad fought in the war, this is not true, and then they'd react badly to minorities. And one point the speaker said was, oh, wars happened a long time ago, so people have forgotten everything about it, and people don't really know things. Now, I when I first heard that, was like, well, that's not true, right? If wars happened long ago, then there's more historical documentation that's dug up, more stories told. Wars that happened very recently, there's more chaos. No one knows exactly what happened, right? There's a lot of, and that's why you don't know where people are missing in action and stuff like that. But like World War II is well documented that like historians have pieced together basically the basic story quite well. More recent wars, not so much. So you could respond to the top level claim and say, no, that's wrong. Or you could try and flip it on a scale. So you could be like, yeah, we buy that, but that undermines their own case. Because where the ethnic tensions that they're trying to solve are the most prevalent are where wars have recently happened. And that's where the information is now more likely known. And so there'll be more backlash. Whereas, World War II wars and Japanese internment camps and that kind of thing that you might want to solve has already broadly been solved, right? Like ethnic tensions between the US and Japan have reduced. So where they're least called out is the least useful. Where they're most called out is where they're trying to get their biggest benefit. So you can't do both of those, right? Because you can either flip it or you can disprove it. And it's up to you to choose which one is more likely. Like I probably in this debate, in that choice, probably do the flip. Just because I think it'll be more impactful from your side. Like just disproving that people find out about lying more or less is like, I don't see where the big impact is. Does that make sense? Cool. Flips usually flips are just more useful because again, you can just claim all of the work they've done because they've just done so much time impacting a point and you're like, nah, it's ours. And we win on your own metric. You don't have to do weighing as well because you're just winning on their stuff as well. Cool. Any last questions? 3 minutes. Wow, I didn't think this would take an hour. No? Cool, let's wrap up. See you, everyone. No, it wasn't for you, it was the online people.